Hello, everybody. This is the first lecture in the beginning of our section on metaphysics. So this is going to be a somewhat introductory lecture. If you get a chance, I hope, what you should be doing reading-wise is reading the standard Stanford Encyclopedia article that's been posted that tries to lay out, some idea of what metaphysics is. Definitely read the beginning and the first few sections of that article, and as things go, that you can use that article as a reference for other things that are that we'll be talking about. So what is metaphysics? Well, in one regard, it's the science of everything. It's not really necessarily an empirical science, but it is a organized body of knowledge and an organized sort of method of studying things. So metaphysics, what is it? Well, in a sense, metaphysics is really the study of everything. It's the study of the most fundamental questions that, are at the foundations of every other kind of science or inquiry. Like metaphysics goes beyond physics. It goes beyond every other possible kind of science or thought, insofar as, if we're studying it. Metaphysics studies or asks what the nature of particular things is, right? So this is assuming that things have what are called natures. Then what is it for a certain kind of thing to be the kind that it is another way of thinking about it, right? So for any kind of thing that you can put in there for X, what is it that makes a thing that kind of thing? What is it to be a member of that kind of thing? What is it to be part of that group? What makes the thing how it is, rather than just being an instance of the kind, or among the members of the group? Like, what is it about the thing that makes it a member of the group? Similarly, metaphysics studies relations, right? So how is it that certain kinds of things, like or a thing X is related to a thing Y, where we go beyond things like mere spatiotemporal relations, and we focus instead on issues like grounding or reduction, or a big flashy word, supervenience, where the idea is supposed to be something like, look, I don't know, take an example that we've talked about, like moral truths. So morality. What is the relationship between morality and human beings? Well, according to a view like cultural relativism, human morality is grounded in cultural practices, right? We can, in some sense, understand what morality is in terms of its relation to, and the truths are relative to particular cultural groups' practices. That would be an answer to how morality is related to human culture, right? I don't think that it's right. I think that I think that cultural relativism is probably wrong, but it's at least an answer. It's a kind of metaphysical answer to a question. Metaphysical topics. So there's lots of different things that metaphysics studies. There's some really basic and old, long-standing debates over the nature of objects or individuals and properties. And then that debate turns into this debate over whether or not there exist these things called universals, or the only thing that exists are particulars. The study of philosophy, of metaphysics, sometimes gets boiled down to what's called ontology. Ontology is the study of what exists. If you ever hear someone talking about their ontology, that's ONTOLOGY, they mean the set of objects that they consider as existing. So, like, the ontology of fundamental physics takes there to be different kinds of fundamental particles. Those are the kinds of things that exist in the theory of fundamental physics. And another, classic old chestnut of metaphysics is, what is reality, right? Like, is reality made up of physical stuff out here in the world? Or is it more based on, all kinds of other things? Like, is it all ideas? Is it all perceptions in the mind of God? What is reality? Different metaphysicians over the millennia, starting with the ancient Greeks, have answered this in funny and different ways, right? So Thales, possibly one of the first real philosophers, when asked what reality is, he said, everything is water. Everything is basically made up of water. And in a sense, he's, totally wrong. But by that, he kind of meant everything is made up of this like fluid energy like substance that's, obviously water. People have taken that and run with it in different ways. Yeah, Thales is an interesting early character. Other metaphysical topics, more recent and specific philosophical topics that people sink their teeth into these days, have more to do with these just generally more specific things, right? Like, what is space? What is time? That's like the metaphysics of physics. Whether or not we have free will, and what it would be to have free will. So the debate over free will and determinism. What it is to be you, right? What you are, whether or not you're like what it is to be a person, whether or not you have a soul, or whether or not your mind, like what your mind is, what it is to have psychological continuity over time, what kind of thing you are. The nature of modality is a really interesting one. The nature of possibility and necessity, basically, is what modality is. What kinds of things are possible? What kinds of things are necessary? What kinds of things have to be the case? What kinds of things could have been different, right? Like, could um, could could Donald Trump have lost the election? That seems, yeah, totally possible. But could Donald Trump have been a toaster oven? Well, I don't really know. I don't know what that means, right? And finally, my favorite debate, whether or not a hot dog is a sandwich. This is, of course, a hotly contested issue in the current state of things, especially on the internet. And we'll be discussing it here for a little bit. All right, so historically, metaphysics is called metaphysics because of Aristotle. And why is that? Well, Aristotle basically, he was an ancient great. He was a scientist and a philosopher. He was the student of Plato. He basically studied everything. He was big into biology and physics, and really did a lot for philosophy. I mean, these days we would be almost nowhere in philosophy, I think, if it weren't for Aristotle. And he even taught Alexander the Great, who, conquered half of the known world at the time that he existed. Now, one of the lecture series that Aristotle gave was called Physics, the Physics. And the lecture series after the Physics became called the Metaphysics, right? And the theories proposed in the Physics were about motion and space and time and like how things move. The Metaphysics, though, was actually focused on issues that went beyond physics and studied things that were sort of above or after physics, in a sense. Another way of thinking about it or talking about it is that Aristotle thought metaphysics studied being qua being. Well, what does that mean? Well, qua is sort of like from the perspective of. So it's like, what does metaphysics study? Well, it studies being from the perspective of being, right? So it studies existence, like what it is for a thing to exist, from the perspective of what the nature of existence is, like what it is for something to exist in the first place. Or what it is to be or have being from the perspective of whatever it is to be in the first place. So you can study how things, generally are shaped, or how they're related to each other in space and in time, or how things are, related to each other genetically, how it is that one thing generates another thing, like, the genesis of particular individual human beings, or like how it is that humans evolved from other kinds of animals, or how other animals evolved. But when you're studying those things, you're studying them from a perspective, right? You're studying them from a particular perspective where you've gotten certain things that you're taking for granted about, the nature of the science or the subject matter that you're talking about. But in metaphysics, the perspective that we're taking is what it is for something to be in the first place, right? We're studying how things are from the perspective of trying to study what it is for something to exist to begin with. So clearly, I mean, clearly it seems like there are things, but there's these interesting questions like, why are there these things? And how are there these things? You know, like the Backstreet Boys say, tell me why. Tell me why. All right, so here's the example. Hot dogs. Right? What is a hot dog? Why is a hot dog? Maybe a better question. Well, so you can answer this in some different ways. What is a hot dog? Well, it's a bun. It's got a sausage in the middle and maybe some sauce on it. And yeah, that's like an answer to what is a hot dog. But those things that you're answering there are, the things that make up a hot dog. But what really is a hot dog? Like, what is the thing? What kind of thing is it? Well, it's a food item, right? Yeah, that's right. That's true. It's definitely a food item, but that's pretty general, right? I mean, like an Oreo is a food item. Is an Oreo a hot dog? No. Okay. So we know it's a food item. So we need to get more specific now. Like, what kind of food item is a hot dog? Well, you might think it's sort of like a sandwich, right? Um, and that's good. That's getting at the kind, but is it really a sandwich? So here's the example, right? Like, what is a sandwich? Well, generally, a sandwich is some kind of food that we eat around the middle of the day, a lunchtime food, and it usually consists of some meat and some cheese, and usually it's between bread. Great, right? So obviously, then a hot dog is a sandwich, right? Clearly. Well, wait a minute. No, that's too fast, right? It's too fast to say that a hot dog is a sandwich just on the basis of the fact that we've got, meat and cheese between bread. Um, if a hot dog is a sandwich, or if really all it takes for something to be a sandwich is for there to be meat or cheese between bread, then pizza's a sandwich, right? All you got to do is take that thing and fold it up, and now you got sandwich. Now that seems wrong, right? Like that's taking this too far. Here we've gone way too far. If accepting a hot dog to be a sandwich gets us to pizza is a sandwich, well, that seems a little bit wild, doesn't it? So what else do we need then, right? Um, if we Do we have to say that pizza is a sandwich too? I mean, I don't know. There are things like open-faced sandwiches, right? Sandwiches that don't that are kind of they don't have a top layer of bread. So maybe like pizza itself can be a sandwich, and then you can just like fold it, and then it looks like it is closed. I mean, but wait, maybe we can take this thing even further, right? What about when I hug two of my friends? Do we make a sandwich in that case with the person in the middle? What if I just take any two things, like I take my one hand and my other hand and I put my dog's paw in the middle. Have I made a sandwich then, right? Just by layering things. What if it turns out that everything is a sandwich, right? I mean, just because if there are open faced sandwiches and it's, all you have to do is layer things, then it looks like everything is either like a sandwich or part of a sandwich in some way, right? I mean, like my body is just a skin sandwich, or, the molecules are just, atom sandwiches. So and even atoms are just subatomic particle sandwiches, right? No. Okay. This has gone way too far, way too far. So we need to dial things back a little bit and ask, okay, look, when we're asking questions like, what is a hot dog? We're asking for the nature of that kind of thing. We're looking for the conditions under which a thing counts as the kind of thing that it is. So, what are those conditions, right? What are the conditions that we're looking for? Well, insofar as we know how to specify the conditions in English, right, in a language, we're looking for what are often called the necessary and sufficient conditions for a thing to be the kind of thing that it is. So, what are necessary and sufficient conditions? Well, necessary conditions are the kinds of conditions that a thing must have in order to count as a member of the kind, right? So for example, it's in order to be a cat, it's a necessary condition for something to be a mammal. There's no such thing as a cat that's not a mammal. You can have like a toy plush cat, right? But it's not really a cat. Why? Because it's not a living thing. It's a stuffed animal, right? It's not a real mammal, so it's not really a cat, right? A thing, if it's going to be a cat, it better be a mammal. Imagine you had a robot cat. Well, if that thing wouldn't be a mammal, so it wouldn't really be a cat. It's a robot. So, necessary conditions are the kinds of conditions that a thing must have in order to count as being the kind that it is. So, set of questions then. To be a sandwich, does bread have to be involved, right? Do you have to have bread in order to be a sandwich? Or, can I use crackers? Can I use tortillas? Can I use, my hands, like my arms? Can I hug people and turn this into a sandwich? Um, if it does require bread in some way, do you need two pieces of bread, right? Or are open-faced sandwiches a kind of sandwich, right? You could deny that. You could say, actually, no, open-faced sandwiches, they're like, it's like having a stuffed animal cat. It's not really a cat. The same way open-faced sandwiches aren't really sandwiches. They're similar to sandwiches. We call them open-faced sandwiches, but they're not really sandwiches. I mean, just in the same way that, a plushy cat is it's similar to a cat, looks like a cat, maybe even feels like a cat. Maybe if you squeeze it, it's got a little thing in it that makes a meowing sound, but it's not really a cat, right? We still call it a cat, but it's not a cat. Does there have to be something in between the two pieces of bread, right? Can you just have like bread on bread and that would be a sandwich, bread sandwich? Can the bread be closed on one side? So like, like a submarine sandwich, it's only cut in one part. Or like if you took a piece of bread and you just kind of folded it over into like a half sandwich. What about all the sides? If all the sides were closed, like could it be that like a burrito counts as a sandwich, or maybe that like a calzone counts as a sandwich, or maybe those little uncrustable things where they put the jelly and the peanut butter inside the bread and then they cut the crust off. But the way that they do it, they make the sandwich into like a little pocket, right? It's like a little empanada, or like a little little hand pie. Does the meat in the or cheese have to be of a certain shape? I mean, like if you don't think a hot dog's a sandwich, maybe your problem is that a hot dog has a sausage in it. Or hot dog is a sausage, right? And that would be, yeah, maybe that's the problem, right? Like, but then there's another question. Like, well, it seems like a meatball submarine sandwich counts as a sandwich, and that's just got these big balls in it, big meatballs, and that, I don't know, like things start to get out of hand, right? These questions are difficult to say whether or not any of these are necessary conditions on whether or not something counts as a sandwich. Then we've also got sufficient conditions we've got to answer for, right? So a sufficient condition is met when it's a condition that says that something is enough for something else, right? So basically, here's an example. Let's reverse it, right? Being a cat is sufficient for being a mammal. If something really is a cat, because we know that you have to be a mammal to be a cat, then if you are a cat, then that's a sufficient condition on being a mammal. Now, of course, more stuff goes into being a cat than being a mammal, right? To be a cat, you've got to be, you got to be from a cat. You can't be a dog or anything like that, right? Mammals, though, to be a mammal, you can be a cat, you can be a dog, you can be an elephant, you can be all sorts of things. But here, yeah, the idea is like, well, okay, there are sufficiency conditions. If you meet this one condition, being a cat, then you also meet all the conditions to be a mammal. So it's sufficient. If you're a cat, then you're a mammal. Well, something maybe the same thing, it goes for sandwiches, right? So if you're a submarine sandwich, then you are a sandwich. Being a sub is sufficient for being a sandwich. That seems true. If you are any kind of sandwich, right? If you're a French dip, then you are a sandwich. What we're looking for now is like all of the necessary conditions, and then all of the sufficient conditions, or in some sense like a that's all condition, where we've got all the necessary conditions plus a condition that says and no more or no less conditions are going to apply. All of these things count as being a sandwich and all these things don't, or something like that. So now what we want is both necessary and sufficient conditions to help specify the metaphysical nature of a thing, right? So if we're looking for the metaphysical nature of a sandwich, we want both the necessary and sufficient conditions that make a thing the kind of thing that it is. So metaphysical nature, what is it for a thing to be the kind of thing that it is? That's what it is to have a metaphysical nature. If a thing has a metaphysical nature, that metaphysical nature is the essence of what that thing is. So an individual thing has properties, right? We'll say some of those properties are necessary and some of those things are accidental, right? So like, a house has the property of being red. It has the property of being 2 stories. It has the property of being located at such and such across streets. Some of those properties, might be required for the thing to be a house, and some of those properties are going to be, accidentally things of the house, right? Here's another example. I, Kyle Dickey, am a human being. I am currently in New York. I'm recording this lecture for you from New York. I came out here to visit. And now question, right? These are 2 properties of me. I'm a human being and I'm currently in New York. Question, if I stop being in New York, which I will do in the near future, do I stop being me? Is being in New York a feature of my essence? Is it something that is part of what it is to be me? No, of course not, right? If I stop being in New York, I continue to be me. I just continue to be me in a different place. However, what if I stop being a human being? What if I somehow cease to be a human being and become a corpse? Or if I cease to be a human being and become, upload my consciousness to the internet? Well, in those cases, what happens? Do I cease to be me if I stop being a human being? Well, I mean, in a sense, clearly, if I die, I cease to be me, and I stop being a living human being if I die. So that's an interesting point. What about though if I upload my consciousness to the internet somehow? What if I somehow figure out how to, put my mind into a robot or something like that? Do I cease to be me? Well, I might cease to be a human being in that case, but am I still me? Well, that's an interesting and more difficult question, right? It seems like being a human being, at least in most senses, is clearly necessary for me to be me, as far as I can tell. But maybe it's possible for me to continue existing after being a human being. I mean, it's an interesting question. We'll talk about it more too. Like maybe I'm maybe I'm a soul. Maybe my soul is sort of not attached to my body. And if I am a soul, then I'm not really a human being. I'm a soul that can be, maybe reincarnated in different kinds of creatures or animals, or maybe all sorts of things. Who knows? All right, so let's get down to it. Some properties of objects are contingent, while others are necessary, right? That is, some kinds of properties that things have are accidental to those kinds of things, right? Like where a thing is located is, in a sense, usually accidental to it. Where a thing, like how big a thing is in some sense accidental to it, right? So I have 10 fingers. That's accidental to me, right? If I lost one of my fingers, I wouldn't cease to be me. It's a contingent fact about me that I have all of my digits right now in this current time. If I got in a horrible car accident tomorrow and lost 3 of my fingers, I wouldn't stop being me. But certain other properties are necessary of me or of different kinds of things, right? So interesting question, right? Like take a hot dog that happens to have mustard on it. Well, the mustard is a contingent feature of the hot dog. But, if you blew the hot dog up, right? So it was spread out all over a room, I think you probably cease to have a hot dog, right? Because part of it's, necessary, it seems, for something to be a hot dog, that it be, a whole, that it be contiguous, that it somehow be connected to itself rather than exploded, right? You might have an exploded hot dog after you blow it up, but it's no longer really a hot dog, right? An exploded hot dog is just bits of a hot dog that are flown all over the place, right? You no longer have a real hot dog. So it seems like it's a necessary condition, at the very least, on something's being a hot dog, that it's together. So now you might ask, okay, well, what the heck are properties? I understand this idea that some of these, features of a thing could be accidental while others can be necessary. But what is it for a thing to have properties to begin with? Like, what are they? And this is sort of one of the biggest metaphysical problems, questions, conundrums that anyone has ever faced. Now, one sort of a way to think about this, and the way that we're going to continue to think about this, is this way. Properties are features or attributes of individuals that can be shared with other individuals. Individuals are just anything that you can refer to, right, as a particular thing, like that chair or that apple or me or you. But wait a minute. Okay, so we say that, we've got these individuals, and then these individuals have properties, and these properties can be shared, right? So we've got that chair and that apple. They're both red. They share the property of being red. But you might be like, well, wait a minute. What the heck does it mean to say that properties are shared? This seems kind of metaphorical, or it's a little bit weird. Like, in what way is a chair and an apple related such that they share something? Isn't sharing a thing that we all learned to do in kindergarten? Okay, well, so here, this brings us to this really fundamental debate in classical metaphysics. That is the debate between what's called Platonism and Nominalism. Platonism comes from Plato. It's sort of the view that he held to. Nominalism, I think, well, I don't know exactly where the name comes from, but it sort of makes sense. And well, you'll see why. So classic philosophical debate: are there universals? Do universals exist? Universals are basically just properties. That's the thought. Properties are things that are had by individuals. A property or a universal is something that different individual things can have at different times, and that different individual things can share with one another. So a universal, for example, would be like the property of being red. This apple and this chair can both share the property of being red at the same time, right? A red ball and a red apple, they have the same, let's say even the same shade of red. Well, interesting question. If this ball and this apple, two separate entities, have the same shade of red, question: is it the same red, or is it a different red? Like, in what sense is the red that is the red of the ball and the red of the apple, in what sense are they the same thing? Like, what does that even mean to say? What does it mean to say that, like, I mean, I don't know, like, look at your two hands and think about your skin color. Well, your right hand and your left hand have the same color, right? I mean, unless you've got some drastic skin issue, or you left one of your arms out in the sun for a long time and forgot to put the other one out in the sun. So what is it to say that your hands have the same color? Is that there's one thing that is somehow uniting your hands? Well, that's supposed to be a universal. Here's another kind of example. How many words are, in the middle of the red block, right? There seems to be, two different answers that you could give here. There's either the answer that there's just one word, or there's the answer that there's three words. And each of these answers is sort of good. It's just that, the question I asked was actually ambiguous. When I ask how many words are in the middle of the red block, I mean to be asking how many types of words. And the answer to how many types of words is one, right? There's clearly one type of word there, the word red. The word red has been instantiated or tokened 3 times in the middle of the red block. But there's just one type of word here, right? And so the idea here is supposed to be kind of like this. Think about it this way. The type of word is like the property. Different kinds of things can instantiate the same property. Here, in each of these cases, we've got 3 physical instances, right? We've got the instance of red here, here, and here. And each of those is a physical tokening of the word red. But the physical tokening of the word red is basically the instantiation. It's the thing, it's the individual that has the property of being of the kind, the word red, right? Now, that's maybe a little bit helpful, right? So here's what we get to now in this debate. Platonists believe that there are universals in individuals. They believe that there are individual things out there, like objects, or just kind of particular entities, right? There are particular entities, and particular entities have properties or universals that they instantiate. Individuals instantiate properties, and those properties are shared or shareable between different individuals, right? So I am a human being. You are a human being. We both instantiate the property of being human beings. We're not the same person, but we have the same property. We share the property of being human beings. Same thing for, I have a computer. My computer is showing me this screen right now. You have a computer. Your computer is showing you this screen right now. Both of our computers have the property of showing us this screen right now, right? They aren't the same computer, but they share the property. All that being said, hopefully that's not too confusing. The classic debate between Platonists and nominalists is that the nominalists deny that there are universals. In the end, the nominalists say, look, I don't really know what it means to say that there are these things, these properties, and that they're somehow shared between individuals. Like, what is that? I mean, according to Plato, and this is where Plato's theory starts to get a little bit off the rocker. It goes a little bit crazy or haywire. According to Plato, there's this place that's not really a physical place. It's called Plato's heaven. And in Plato's heaven, all of these universals exist in their purest forms. They exist in the purest forms, and that place is perfection. And somehow, the universals instantiate themselves imperfectly in the real world. Now that sounds a little bit crazy, and if that's what you have to buy into, if you're a Platonist, then I'd maybe stop believing so much in Platonism. But the nominalists basically say something like, look, I understand that things are similar to one another, but I don't really think that, that red ball and that red apple somehow share the same property of redness. I buy into the idea that there's, two individuals, the red ball and the red apple, but I don't think of them as somehow sharing one unified thing, one unified universal. Instead, the nominalist says, no, look, all that exists are particulars. There's just particulars out there. There's not these things particulars and these other things universals and or properties. There's just particulars. And then, some particulars are similar to one another, and some of them are dissimilar to one another. So, human beings are dissimilar to kitchen tables in lots of different ways, right? There's lots of ways to be similar or dissimilar, and human beings are dissimilar to kitchen tables, but that doesn't mean that, any human being, that doesn't mean that there's this property of being a human being and this property of being a table, and that somehow these individuals have or share or lack these properties of one another. No, so nominalists try to explain properties away by appealing to what we might think of as similarity relations between individuals. Now, that is already to say too much. Because if you think about it, if you think about a relation, well, it seems like a relation is just a special kind of property. And if it's a special kind of property, then it is a universal. So nominalists can't even really say that two different things have the property of being similar to one another, right? They can't say that they stand in specific relations of similarity to one another, because saying that is basically just to say that something has a property. So yeah, it's really unclear to say like what it is for one thing to be similar to another thing. And so it's really strange, I think, to be like, oh yeah, the red ball and the red apple, well, they're similar to one another, but the redness of each one is a totally distinct thing. It's just a particular. The redness of the ball is where the ball is, and the redness of the apple is where the apple is, and there's no same thing that both of them share. Well, maybe. I don't know. Nominalism is hard. It's really hard to understand how it is that you can explain nominalism. So we're just going to move past it. What do I mean by that? Well, we're just not going to assume nominalism or think about it too much. It's super difficult to understand how the nominalist can actually do any explaining if they can't appeal to at least some of the basic things that we normally talk about. And the basic things that we normally talk about are individuals and properties. So from here on, after this sort of basic metaphysical intro lecture, I'm just going to assume that there are individual objects out there, objects, particulars, things, entities, and that there are properties that are out there. And that properties are the kinds of things that individuals have, right? So you've got, your dog, and it has the property of being furry. You've got, your mother, and she's got the property of being a certain age. You've got, the Empire State Building, and it's got the property of being in New York. Then I'm also going to assume that individuals have essences. And what an essence is it's an essence of an individual it depends on the kind of thing that individual is. In a sense, whatever the kind of thing that individual is, that determines the essence of the individual. The essence of an individual is what makes that individual up. It's all of the necessary properties of that individual, plus a sufficient property. A property that says, and that's all, folks, right? That's all the necessary properties of this thing. No more necessary properties for this thing, right? So it'd be like, the essence of an individual, let's take like, an apple. An apple's essence is going to be, that it's got, this kind of core and this kind of flesh and this kind of skin, and it's not necessary for it to be of a certain color, but it's got to have a certain kind of history, right? It's got to come from a certain kind of tree. Those are all, we list out all of the conditions, all the things that make an apple an apple, make it the kind of thing it is. And then we add this final clause that says, and there are no further necessary conditions for something to be an apple. And so that's the sufficient clause. And then now we've got all the properties that make something an apple, all the necessary and sufficient conditions on something's being an apple. And that gives us the essence of what it is for a thing to be an apple. Now, given all that, if we assume all that, that makes it easier to talk. So moving forward in talking about metaphysics, we're just going to make these assumptions that there are individuals and that they do have properties, and that their properties, are coming, their accidental properties and their essential properties. And the essential properties, the ones that are necessary, are the ones that make up the thing's nature. They all taken together make up the thing's nature.